Now we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of a C# program. And the first thing we're going to dive into is a namespace. So namespaces allow us to break up our code so that it can be easier to understand and maintain, especially as our programs get really large. And it can also allow us to avoid conflicts with names in our code. So if we use like my class as a name for a class and someone else uses that, well, it's only going to reference things within our namespace. So that allows us to avoid a conflict between those two. They can exist together. So let's go ahead and just create our own namespace. And we're just going to call it my namespace. And that's it right there. We have a namespace. Now we're going to put something in here. We'll add a class. And we'll say my class. And we'll just fill this out and go ahead and make it an entire program. So we're going to make it a console app. We have to pass in our args. You don't have to worry about exactly what this is right here. But now we have a working program with my namespace, my class. Now, I want to go into something that could happen if you're coding and you name things that conflict with other namespaces. So let's go ahead and add a system.console here. And we're going to right line out. We'll just say hello world. So now our program actually works. Now system itself is a namespace. You can see right here when I hover over it, it says that it's the system namespace. Now this is a global namespace that is part of the .NET framework itself. So we're always using namespaces whenever we're referencing different code that we want to run. Now console is a class within the system namespace. So they're doing the exact same thing that we're doing here with my namespace and my class. Now let's pretend that we just wanted to create a class called system and see what happens. So Visual Studio is going to see that and give us an error and say the system class doesn't contain, or the system doesn't contain a definition for console. And that's because now this system is looking at our class rather than the global system namespace that .NET provides. Now, highly recommended that you don't name things system because that's going to cause you a lot of problems. But if you wanted to, you really just went crazy, you could still do this, but we need to tell C# that we want to start looking for this system thing at the global root scope rather than starting from where we're at and working up the tree. We're going to start from the top of the tree and come down. So we're going to say global : and this is just a construct that you can use to allow us to find that namespace and resolve this conflict that we had. Now, if you don't really understand what we're talking about yet, it'll come to you a little more as we build out more code, but just know that you want to avoid using the system namespace or any name for system that could conflict with the .NET framework system namespace. But if you do, you have this global construct that you can use to avoid that conflict. So this is the basics of a C# program. And one thing that we want to think about too is we may want to break this up even more and have another namespace within a namespace. So we'll just call this my nested namespace. Now in here, we could have another class, my class, and it doesn't conflict with our other class called my class now. It's fine. If I were not to have this here, and I had my class again out here, we're going to have an error because we can't have a class with the same name in the same namespace. So we can put it into a different namespace now. And then if we wanted to reference this class somewhere else, we could say up here, we could say my nested namespace dot my class. So now we've got a reference to that class in my nested namespace versus the one that we're currently in. But you basically use that dot notation here to go from a namespace to the types or from a namespace to another namespace. So you'll see that a lot. And then you'll have namespaces within namespaces, and then we can use a using directive to avoid having to have these really long lines of code. Like right now we have I'm going to get rid of this system to resolve this conflict. But right now we have system.console.writeLine. We can make this where it's only console.writeLine by using a using directive. So if I say using system, this tells C#, hey, I want to import everything from system into the root where you're going to look for things so that we can avoid having to have this system keyword here. So now this is a valid line of code, whereas before without using system, it's not. So if I take this out, all of a sudden it doesn't know where console resides. But now we tell it, hey, we want to import everything from using so that we have it available to us to use. So this is the basic construct of a C# program. You're going to see this a lot, and it's going to be how you're going to break up your code as you start to build larger applications. So I will see you in the next video.